Hello and good afternoon to you. Today we have the incredible opportunity to be speaking with Dr. Ivo Kustaroff, who is based in Japan and has quite an international flavor to him. And he's a physicist and engineer who has really become almost a medic of sorts in the COVID-19 pandemic. So here we are, Ivo. Welcome to this interview today. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you, Dr. Philip Macmillan, for your kind introduction. I'm here in Osaka, Japan, and I'm very glad to answer any questions from you or from our extended community on LinkedIn, and many of our, common connections will join probably tonight and try to ask some questions which we like to answer.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, Ivo, what fascinated me is that you are Bulgarian, so you're based in the European Union. You then worked, I think, and studied in Canada. You've also studied in China, and you're now living in Japan. So you have a proper international feel about you.
Thank you for this introduction. I mean, I have lived and worked, and actually I speak some of the local languages in Asia, which including in the past Mandarin, Chinese, and now currently Japanese. So yes, it's very rare when a foreigner, which is not Asian, join a Japanese company and be kind of treated as a normal Japanese employee, because which is in Japanese called seishin, because that's very rare for many reasons. Traditional Japanese companies, especially in the area in Kansai, they always have this tendency: we are fine by ourselves, we don't need foreigners. We can have foreigners outside Japan for our divisions, but not inside of our R&D or our headquarters. So that was one of the first rare opportunity. That's why I took it in 2005 when I was living in Toronto and working there.
Yes.
In one company, which actually I don't need to be reluctant to disclose, very, very famous international company, Murata Manufacturing, known as Murata Electronics outside of Japan, invited me to join their team, and I accepted simply by moving from 600 employee company in Canada to, at that time, was 15,000. Now Murata have grown to 45,000.
Wow. So tell me now, Ivo, because the reason that we are connected is through your incredible work with regards to COVID-19. How is it that you, as a physicist and an engineer, is doing so much in terms of medical research? What triggered it for you?
Okay, that is actually a very good question, and I like to answer exactly what triggered that. I saw many early posts in let's say, early March 2020, when things start to get hotter. And at that time, I see comments from different biomedical and medical and biochemical people in the LinkedIn, which is one of the forums I keep actively monitoring compared to the other social media, which I don't have account in Twitter or Facebook. I don't have those accounts. So I was fascinated from the fact that if somebody make a statement, we don't know yet. I said, let me check the literature. Maybe we can find something. And then step by step, some people connected to me and said, how you know that much? I don't know, I just searched.
So this is the thing, is that you then use your research skills in engineering, and you transferred it into the context of COVID-19. And you've now got knowledge about immunity as well. How did you do that?
Okay, so after that hot discussion that started in March, immediately one researcher from Netherlands, Dr. Harm Goertes, he said, let's write a paper about the antihistamine receptors and the SARS-CoV-2. And I said, but I don't know so much. They said, don't worry, just contribute as much as you can. And then I realized that the first thing I can contribute is find the right relevant references. And that is not simple, because for first time I realized many medical authorities, including people that need to make decisions for their own countries, they have not opened the books about the original SARS, which unfortunately have stopped doing that research because the SARS one disappeared and the research ceased. But the books and the monographies and the reviews are there. Which medical plants, which antihistamine compounds have very good reactions against this coronavirus. And that's why I realized that I should help, because at least we need to connect the old one versus the new one. Even specialists should know it. They somehow, enter too deeply into the new one without following the connection of the existing information.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Ivo, is that we spent so much time focused on the current situation that we forgot just how important it was to understand the first SARS-CoV epidemic. We didn't actually take the time to look carefully at how the virus operated then and transfer that knowledge into today.
And that's why a few things happen after that. I mean, my co-author drafted this paper. I contributed as much as I can. I did very minor changes. And finally, we deposited in the archives as a preprint. But finally, when it was accepted for publication after review, I decided I'm not the expert in this field. And I requested my name to be removed from the authorship, which everybody was surprised, but that's what I decided. So that is my point. That is my triggering point, that I start to learn a lot of things, including the virons and how we can make them to be non-active, how we can make the vector vaccines, how to care about all these viral, antiviral effects of multiple natural herbal compounds, and already approved for use medical compounds. Some of them are without prescription. And suddenly there was no any guidance from any world institution, including CDC or any other one, saying what people should take as a prevention.
Yeah. Now, it raises an interesting question that you had mentioned before, Ivo. You mentioned about the Japanese vaccine. What's happening with regards to that? Do you know it?
This is a very good point. Somehow, the Japanese vaccine is under the radar because they only publish in Nikkei Asia or a few English, like Japan Times, few English newspapers and online editions, which means that is not covered by the world media. And second, they may be feeling inferiority complex, but that is not the right thing to do, because being slow or being less covered by the lights of the media doesn't make you weaker in solving this crisis, in the sense of providing the right solution as a vaccine.
And so they have a vaccine that's in development, and they're using a different mechanism to be able to...
That's right, they're using a different mechanism. I was surprised myself. One is they're infecting a non-mammals, means they're infecting insects, and then they're extracting some new viruses from the insects to make them non-active to the human. So this is very unique concept. I don't think anybody have tried it. Second is another type of vaccine also developed in Japan. I think Osaka University is involved with that, in some other national disease institute. So contagious disease. So this different type of vaccines in Japan, they will start the clinical studies just in 2021, which means in 1 or 2 months. So they won't be ready until maybe 2022. But in my opinion, that's not the key factor. Safety, effectiveness on the population older than 65, 70 years old is the most important, I think, as they're the most vulnerable. They have high risk factor, 10 times higher than the average population.
Yeah. So here's an interesting question, because one of the things that caught a lot of attention on a post that I did recently was that the total number of deaths in Japan is less than 2,500, which is less than what happens in, say, the USA in a day. So this is quite remarkable. How did the Japanese manage to avoid the mistakes that other countries did with regards to their elderly care home residents?
Okay.
Any understanding about that? Because that's
Okay.
one of the main reasons a lot of countries were hit with high mortality.
Correct. So let's put it this way. In Japan, as what is that called? Country of omotenashi, which means service kindness-driven concept, means the servicing of the customer is the highest priority. That's a very cultural, deeply culturally rooted concept in Japanese society. So they really realized early on that tracing the clusters, especially for this elderly, was the key. So how they did it, there was some kind of centralized task force in Japan, which has a lot of data and a lot of kind of manually phone calls driven tracing. But still, even in that early stages in April, they realized that these are the hottest points they need to control, because they're the high risk group and they very easy to get infected. So why Japan did well, we don't know fully, but we can reconstruct certain scientifically valid points. First of all, people that work in these retirement homes or older elderly establishments, they do not have two jobs. So this means they're dedicated for that job only. They don't have so much interaction with the other part of the communities, except maybe their homes. So you have less infections, unless, and that's what they realize. Second thing, they use their supercomputer, which is one of the most powerful in the world, the national government, allow the researchers to simulate how the micro droplets and later how the super small kind of airborne particles flow in the confined room environment. They immediately realized that without excessive ventilation, there is no way masks or personal protection can stop this infection. So they did the right thing. Immediately open the windows, allow the natural flow, and reduce the density of elderly people not to share the same eating or distancing and all this common sense precautionist measure before they have been published by scientific communities.
That's incredible. So they just use basic principles, ventilation, good hygiene, and social distancing, and suppressed the virus in a way that it has.
And to be honest, that's exactly the approach Taiwan did it, but Taiwan started maybe 3 months or 4 months earlier than Japan, because they have their own connections and they learn that something is happening in China without official notice. So Taiwanese government did even earlier, but Japan followed their own way. They said, we don't have so many masks at that time, so the best thing is to make physical distancing, strong ventilation, and exposure to natural air, not to the confined air of the rooms.
And so when we look at as you mentioned, the masks, mask wearing seems to be a natural part of many countries in that part of the world.
That is correct.
Was it just because of the first SARS? What triggered that?
The first SARS was one of the reasons, and even I used mask when I was traveling by airplanes during first SARS from Canada to Japan. So I think everybody was using masks at that time, but in Asia, the masks are more kind of, what is that called? A manner. They maybe don't have the defense, but there's a manner to show, I don't want to expose anybody to higher risk than necessary. Let me wear the mask. So when they learn about this infection, people immediately purchase the mask, even they cost a lot of money at that time, because the black marketers immediately increased the price by 10 times or more in the online, but people still purchase the masks. So why? Because they want to protect each other.
No, hold on. Here, that raises an interesting point. So in Japan, let's just take aside the pandemic. If somebody had a cold,
they immediately put the mask when they go out.
Yes, when they go out. Would they automatically, outside of this, have put on a mask?
Absolutely.
That's incredible.
That is considered something like, I'm infectious, person. I'm not sure how infectious I am, but just to protect any possibility for injuring others, I will put a mask myself.
That is an incredible point, and that's something that doesn't seem to be grasped in other parts of the world. So then what would the Japanese think about the perspective of people who are anti-maskers in the context of a pandemic?
They will politely tell you, please enter this establishment with the mask. If you don't have a mask, we will provide you one, either free, of course. You need to pay maybe 30 cents or something like that. So this is the point. In early May was the most difficult time because the mask was scarce, and sometimes people maybe cannot get them. But still, that was a kind of common rule of self-protection of others, not self-protection of yourself so much. So my point is, people just naturally say, hey, we need masks, let's have them. And the government was trying to provide them, but took time until they arrived, maybe middle of May or something like that. After that, after the end of the temporary 3 weeks lockdown, which was very not harsh and not enforceable in any way, people already have availability to purchase masks with lower costs. So at that time, I'm saying by end of May, when they crashed the second wave, by masks or social distance, everything was working.
Yeah. So what does this mean on the screen? I don't understand the Japanese.
No, this is arigato.
Oh, I see. I thought you were saying something specific.
No.
So it leads us right into one of the big issues across the world, the perspective with regards to managing the virus of lockdowns. Now, Japan had a limited lockdown you were mentioning, and this
is called advisable lockdown, means please work from home, and they requested not to the people, they requested to the employees, and the employees immediately mandated that 70% of the employees must stay at home and work from there. So let me explain a little bit about that.
Yes.
So what that means, if you have an office part of the company work, you can work from home. But if you work in the factory, you must continue going to the factory. How? By your personal vehicle. So the cross-infection from the public transport will be also prevented. Later, they found that public transport actually do not cause transmission, so that was removed as well.
Okay, and so therefore there was a responsibility by the Japanese people to recognize how to reduce the spread personally.
Yes, and this means social responsibility, personal responsibility, and corporate responsibility.
Wow. And so how would the Japanese handle a lockdown if it was required?
That is a very good question. We cannot predict well, because don't forget that many Japanese during the tsunami earthquake triggered an atomic disaster in Tohoku in Fukushima, there was different kind of mixed responses. I mean, some people followed the 30-kilometer guidelines, some people escaped further and they never returned back. So it depends. We cannot predict what will happen if, but please understand one more important thing, and not only you, everybody from the audience. Japan is a constitutional kind of country. Hard to say if it's a monarchy or not, because of the limited authority of the monarch. But there is no way that government can impose harsh lockdowns here, because that will be considered anti-constitutional, regardless of what kind of article of the Constitution they can cite. They said you are in violation. There is no such kind of thing here.
Yes. So in effect then, it was mentioned here, what does that mean? Personal protection against social criticism.
That's a good point. I cannot exactly translate it, but let me put a little bit context here, because the Made in Japan is a self-censored kind of institutions. They too much afraid of putting only one point of view, which they consider always the government. So they always put what opposition parties want to say. Fortunately, opposition parties, what is that called? Usually do not. They say a lot noisily, but they don't have alternative proposals. So they just criticize the government without any solid, valid alternative. So that is one good point. If you watch the official NHK news in Japan, you can immediately understand what the government is saying, and you can see that opposition is against what the government is saying without saying what is the alternative for that. So people, naturally, Japanese people are very high intellectual, kind of social judgment. They immediately can distinguish what's right and wrong, and that makes the system working. That's unfortunately not well explained in the Western media and Western science, because they think that Japanese people are just brainwashed. That's not the case.
No, that's a very, very interesting point. Very good point. Now, I've just got an interesting point here. I'm just going to throw it in front of you. That was just shared. It's quite complex.
Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah.
So, let me put it this way.
Let me just explain. So there is a bacteria that is not a favorable ingredient in Japan dairy industry. And your local manufacturers use different bacteria for cheese and milk. And there is therefore an innate immunity in Japan against the COVID-19 virus. Have you ever seen anything like this?
I have briefly discussed with Dr. Alexander Marakovsky from Ukraine about that. So what is interesting is very interesting. I checked a few things about what milk bacteria is used in Japan. First of all, for the standard dairy of the yogurt, they use the Bacillus bulgaricus, which is coming from my home country and is actually directly exported from there. Second thing is they use newly invented milk bacteria for processing of, let's say, soy milk yogurt. So this means they don't use the standard mainstream bacteria that is widely used. I don't want to say the name of the companies in European Union and US, but we know that they do use this standard one. So this kind of differentiation or careful kind of uniqueness of the approach Japanese milk industry and also now, let's say, plant-based milk industry is taking is very interesting. They're just following their own instinct. They're following their own investigation. They don't take mass produce bacteria and put it in their product.
Yes. Now, you made an interesting point just before we came on, in that Japan had managed to suppress the virus quite well, but they're now seeing a resurgence in the past few weeks. And they're trying to figure out, well, where is it coming from if the borders are closed?
That's a very good question, and I don't think even the experts of that government advisory panel, which have briefings every day usually, have ever discussed. They just call it the third wave. But few things we need to keep in mind. This wave maybe is a different type of version of the virus. I mean, the mutated virus. And second, obviously, this is coming not from Japan. This is coming from Europe, and maybe one version is in France, one is in Spain. And how they come to Japan, if you have closed borders, my opinion is most likely from some of the imported frozen food.
So you think the virus could potentially survive on the food or the packaging?
I think a few weeks ago or months, there was some scientific publication that found that virus can survive up to 30 days if it's below certain degrees centigrade, which I don't know exactly, minus 10 or minus 20 degrees C.
Wow. And so in effect...
And how we learn about that additionally, China refused now some countries' imported meat for that reason. So even China found that the virus is in the frozen meat. And some people are saying if it's in frozen meat, could be in any other frozen food. That makes sense, because people need to put the fruits or other frozen vegetables by some gloves or hands, and that can still transfer the virus.
So do you think then, therefore, that raises a very serious point. So do you think that this potentially then could have an impact not only on travel between countries that have high rates of COVID-19, but potentially impact exports as well from countries that have high rates of COVID-19?
I think this kind of exports, what is it called? These agreements are starting to grow recently. So One of them is coming from Australia, and that's maybe some other non-scientific related reasons. But I think the scientific point of view is still valid. We need to check carefully if the virus can survive in frozen food. Even more, we need to import non-frozen foods from one country to another.
Mm-hmm. And interesting point here. So wherever the virus comes from, it will not affect the local population due to the innate immunity.
You see, that's a good point now. There's a theory that Asian or maybe South Asian group of people have already several thousand years herd immunity against these coronaviruses. So that's maybe that's why their number of deaths are lower. We don't know. But now with so much export-import and intermixing, definitely certain populations can become vulnerable to the other new mutated type of versions of the virus. Then they are not having sufficient immunity to.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But just a second. This is a good point about the flu viruses. In Japan, flu viruses from 90%, 70,000 people in the 2019, now is just down to 3%. That means the mask and the hygiene of hands have crushed the flu viruses in Japan completely.
You know, I said this recently because I've been hearing a similar discussion about the flu in the context of the UK. And I was saying that because clearly the coronavirus is easier to spread, our fact of using masks is going to impact on the viral spread of every other virus, including the flu virus.
I fully agree. So
I want
to say the following. All aspects that make sense to prevent from the virus, rather than studying or checking one by one, they should be synergized together, and then make sense to check the effects and check the results. So, hands is not only the hands. I just want to open the question. In Japan, there is toilet seats sanitizers in most common public places, and people were mandated by their common sense to wipe with this sanitizer before they use the toilets. Second, they need to close the toilets before they flush. They need to carefully wash with strong secondary sanitizers after that. So what they found is coming from this disaster initially they have in this cruise ship that docked near Tokyo. So they learn a lot of things, that the infection there was through the hands and through the washrooms.
Yes.
Not through the air. Air is, of course, confined, but is one additional factor.
So they found that, in effect, the hygiene, basic hand hygiene, was critical to preventing the spread of the virus.
They found that, and also the fact that people share dining spaces in confined space in the cruise ship was also another factor, which was obviously not working.
Very, very, very good point.
That's why in Japan, they immediately put the barriers in the restaurants. They separate 2 meters aside the tables. And of course, people who can afford it, they open the windows, because if you have only air conditioning, you can get infected as well.
Yeah. Was this the reason why they also ventilated the subways to prevent...
And the trains.
Yes.
This was immediately implemented. I mean, this was implemented already by April, and makes sense to me, because why was implemented? The result simulation from the supercomputer showed very clearly that if you have confined space, the chances of infections increases 100 times.
Wow, that's really, really significant. So are we therefore looking at a situation, Ivo, where in effect, if everyone just practiced simple techniques, basic hand hygiene, minimizing contact, social distancing, mask wearing, we could potentially avoid a lockdown similar to what Japan has managed to largely avoid?
I think if we remove the genetic effects, as we discussed, to a certain degree, maybe still there, most likely what you're suggesting should make sense in other countries, because practicing sports in open spaces should not be considered a kind of lockdown offense because that do not allow transmission.
Yes, 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 yes.
Making gyms, making bars and restaurants, yes. But if you dine outside of the restaurant, which in some places I heard in US is still considered offense, that for me doesn't make sense, because if you're outside, you have a natural flow of air and the chances of infections reduces significantly. Of course, you are not allowed to talk loudly like I do now. You need to talk very, very calmly. And second, still keep the distance. In Japan, the recommendation is never more than 4 people to dine together. Where is that recommendation in our country?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, and I mean, there are so many things that I think are quite unique to Japan. One, as he said, they tend to be very polite with mask wearing generally. They tend not to be speaking loudly in public spaces. They tend to largely follow rules and are quite disciplined about hygiene. And so they naturally have a built-in mechanism that will protect them. So when you don't have that cultural base.
Correct. When you don't have this habitual base, then you have a problem.
Yes, yes.
And especially when you try to do it by enforcing mandate, people have a natural resistance to what authorities are demanding. And they said, why I need to do that? That doesn't make sense. This is violating my constitutional personal rights. So then the negative connotation of this natural reaction to defend your kind of freedom causes complications that authorities cannot manage by policing.
Yeah. So here's now, as we come to wrap this up now, Ivo, here is a real important question. Japan clearly has a largely disciplined society, an intelligent, well-educated society, and they are able to work within the restrictions without too much difficulty. Yes. The rest of the world seems to be struggling. But because the virus is so easily spread, it just takes a failure in one part of the world to reinfect the rest. Where is the future?
That's the point. That's a very good question, Dr. Macmillan. I think the answer is not obvious, because there were several models which I watched a few months ago predicting how many waves and what is the frequency of the wave in the next several years. The scenarios in most cases are scary. Airflow to be important factor to introduce mechanical prevention industrial system. That's correct. So that's a good point from our common connection here in Japan. Now several countries start produces air purification plus viral killing activity, including UV LEDs and ozonation. This will become mandatory in several years. The question is, who can mass produce these devices and put them in every meeting room, in every closed space, in offices and homes? I think most likely we can reduce these coming waves.
Yes, yes. But what will the future hold then? Because it means that even if Japan manages to control it, they will have to have a long-term system of trying to exclude the virus by blocking either imports or people.
I hope the advisory council and other government experts are listening to our conversation today, which is very unlikely. But the key point is they need to pay attention now to these unknown transmission mechanisms, like frozen food, export-import of certain type of items, which we don't know which one they found. It's on the stainless steel surfaces. This virus also can survive several weeks or days. And then we need to carefully bring the disinfection of every imported product in the near term to reduce this. Because by testing the people in the airports, if they are really negative, there is not the main transfer mechanism that the current scientific community thinks of.
Yes, so it coming from other sources. Ivo, this has been completely fascinating, and I thank you for the time. And it's fascinating to hear your perspective across many countries, because you've seen how it works in North America, in Europe, in Japan, in China. And critically, I think that you represent an inspiration where I will encourage anybody who has an interest. Just because you are not medical doesn't mean that you can't find solutions to medical problems. And I think you're a perfect example of that.
Thank you for these kind words. I want to say the following. Understanding the graphs, understanding the data statistics, understanding the experiment's purity, when you have so many variables, how these companies that develop drugs and vaccines today, they can claim there is clear outcome when they have so many other implicated factors. They cannot make clean experiments, especially when you include the genetic differences of their sampling size population. So my point is, we need to use more science, more statistics, and more engineering solution, in the sense, let's use artificial intelligence, let's use supercomputers to digest this 10,000 publications or more that we have produced within 1 year, which is very unusual, but we have not found the structurally what causes what.
Yes. So yes, that's quite right. And as we wrap up, thank you, Ivo. I mean, this is a tremendous conversation. Thank you for the time. And I'm sure actually that in the near future, it would be wonderful to have this conversation again. Thank you so much for the people who have been with us today. It's been wonderful. I'm trying to get as many comments in as I can, and have a good day, and we'll look forward to sharing again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Macmillan, and good luck with your activities of introducing several scholars in your live's videos on LinkedIn, and I really appreciate your time tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Okay.
And nice week.